Well, hello my friends, and welcome to this week's video. Today I'm making ornaments. However, all these techniques can be applied to any Christmas DIY project that you'd like to do. It is Create Day, so let's get started. I'm using one of these round doll pins that I picked up from Dollar General. The first thing I'm going to do is give this a coat of my antiquing wax, brushing that on and then wiping it back with a soft, lint-free cloth. I have a piece of cardboard that I separated by running it under the tap. You can see that's how it was before. And then once you run the water down in all those little grooves, that will peel right off. I set it aside to dry, and now I'm going to cut out some angel wings. I just hand drew this little template by looking at a picture of some wings online, and then just traced around that template and cut it out. I'm going to paint this with some white gesso. I'm not doing a thorough paint job on here. I do still want some of that cardboard peeking through. I'm using a craft paint in the color Mushroom to do some dry brushing, offloading most of that paint and just swiping across those ridges on the cardboard. This will add a little bit of age and distressing to it. Next, I'm going to add a stamp to a coffee stained coffee filter. This is IOD's Ephemeral type stamp, and I'm going to do this in my Stays on ink in Timber Brown. I'm just inking up that stamp, and I'm going to do this several times all across this coffee filter so that I can cut out the section that I want, and I can save the rest as a background on something else like a hang tag or whatever project I see fit. So you can kind of see through that coffee filter, so I'm just going to move this around until I like how it lands on those wings. Trace around that and cut that out, and that will go on the back side of my wings. So these will be pretty from the front and the back. When I get this cut out, I'm going to go ahead and glue that onto the back side of the wings with some Mod Podge. I let that dry, and then I applied a light coat of the Mod Podge over that to seal it in. And then I'm going to add some glitter around the edges. I have this gold extra fine glitter that I think probably came from Micheals many years ago. I'm not positive, but I think that's where we used to buy all our craft supplies. And I'm adding a little bit of Mod Podge around the edges with a small brush, and then I'm just going to spoon that glitter on there, trying to get as much of it to attach to the Mod Podge as I can, and then just going back around any areas where it didn't adhere well. For the front of the wings, I wanted to add some lace. This is just a scrap piece of lace I have in my stash. I'm going to apply this with Fabri-Tac glue, just kind of gluing here and there, not like a solid layer of glue, just enough to get the lace to stay on there. And then I will trim off all the excess around the edges. And now to make a little dress for the angel, I've got a scrap piece of tea towel, and I'm going to cut some more of that lace out to go over the top of that. I will glue that down with the Fabri-Tac glue as well. To get this one to adhere properly without getting that glue all over my hands, I just used a little sandwich bag, stuck my hand in there and smoothed it out that way. When that was dry, I laid the little doll pin on there so I could see how long I needed my piece to be. So I went ahead and trimmed that up, and then I'm going to cut that piece in half. Next, I'm just cutting some slits all the way, not quite to the top, just leaving probably about a ½ inch or so that's not cut. And I'm going to layer these two pieces over each other, wrapping around the doll pin and then securing it with hot glue. You can check out my full list of products I used in this video in my description box. I will also leave links for the things that I can leave links for. Next, I'm going to take a little piece of this gold and white ribbon and wrap that around the neckline, just securing that with Fabri-Tac glue. To make the hair, I've got some pieces of jute twine. This is the length I need, the one that's separate. So I cut these all twice that so that I could fold them in half and just cut all of them at the same time. Then I'm going to put these into little separate bundles of, I'm not sure, 6 or 7 pieces of jute twine and tie that together in the middle with a piece of black thread. I'm going to snip off that excess thread and then I will attach these to the doll pin with some hot glue, one bundle at a time. I start by attaching it just in the middle on the top of the head, and then because that jute twine wanted to stick straight out, I did have to go in with a little bit more glue here and there to help get the hair to lay down. Then I attach the next bundle and then the third, and after I have them all on there, then I use my Fabri-Tac glue to help the jute twine lay much more down around the head as opposed to sticking out. Now I'm taking a piece of this chiffon ribbon. I'm just going to tie that around her midsection there, making like a little type of belt or sash. And now it's time to make the halo. I'm using this 20 gauge copper wire. I picked this up in the jewelry department at Micheals, I believe. And I'm using one of those little wood spools to wrap this around because that's about the right size I want for the halo. So then I'm just going to take the ends of that wire and twist it around to secure both of the ends of the circle along with the stem that goes down the back, just kind of wrapping that around itself. It was a little bit difficult to do, so I did bring in the needle nose pliers. That made it a little bit easier to get that bent around just so it will hold its shape. Now to make it a little bit more fancy, I am applying this shiny gold ribbon around the halo section. Just going to wrap that around all the way, pulling it tight as I go, adding little bits of hot glue here and there to hold it in place. I drilled a small hole in the back of the doll pin's head so that I can bend that stem and insert it into the hole to give it more of a grip. When I glue this on here, it gives it kind of something for it to actually glue into. So once I had the right height on that, how I wanted, I'm using E6000, just getting some of that on the end of that wire. And then I'm going to stick that into the hole and clip it in place with one of the little Dollar Tree craft clips and let it dry. Now I'm taking that white and gold ribbon for the hanger, just gluing the ends to themselves, and then attaching it to the back of the doll pin. Then it was time to attach the wings. And the last thing I'm going to do here is take these little black gemstones. I'm going to take one of them, cover it with my Grecian gold rub and buff, and then glue that on the front of her belt. To give that little button some extra shine, I added my triple thick glaze. And here's how it turned out. For my next project, I'm starting with the larger wooden spools that you can get at Hobby Lobby and some raw umber paint. Just going to brush this on and wipe it back with a baby wipe. This way it will act more like a stain than completely covering this with the paint. I'm going to do the same thing with two of these smaller wooden spools, also from Hobby Lobby. When those are dry, I give them a coat of my Duraclear Ultra Matte Sealer. I'm using these three small trees that I believe I got from Micheals. I'm going to use the larger one on the large wood spool and the two smaller ones on the small wood spools. I need to remove that bottom though. I don't want that. So I just held on to the base of the tree and unscrewed those. I've got some of that homespun fabric that you can get from Amazon in a jelly roll. I'm going to cut this down to the right length that I need to fit around my little wooden spool. Then I'm going to attach it with some Fabri-Tac glue. For the two small wooden spools, I'm using Warm and Natural batting instead of the fabric. I'm going to snip that down to fit right up against each other for the seam so it doesn't overlap. And then I'm going to take some Distress ink in the color Antique Linen, and using a little brush applicator, I'm just going to add this to that Warm and Natural to make it a little more vintage looking. And here's the difference between the one without it and the one with the Antique Linen. Now I'm going to use some glitter snow and a palette knife to make some snow on the top of the larger wood spool. I'm just kind of spreading this on and moving it around just as I see fit to look like snow. There's really no specific way to do this. Now they recommend you let this dry for a full 24 hours before you do anything else to it. So in comes the diamond dust when it was completely dry. I'm going to just brush on some Mod Podge, not real thick or completely covering, just enough to get some of this diamond dust to adhere to the top of that snow. It gives it a nice sparkly shimmer that doesn't look really obvious until the light bounces off of it. It's really pretty. Now to put something in that hole for my tree to adhere to, I've got this really tiny cork that was like the perfect fit. So I'm going to attach that wire bottom of the tree into the top of that cork, and then I will glue the bottom section of the cork into the hole in the spool. I've got a wood bead that I have from a pack from Amazon and my red gilding wax. It's called Gilded Touch, and it's available on Amazon as well. Just going to paint up that bead, and now I'm taking this really thin wire, it's 22 gauge, leaving a loop at the bottom after folding it in half, twisting it around, and then I'm going to slide on this little white pearl bead, and then a green one, and then the red one. And those beads came from a pack from Hobby Lobby. I'll be showing that to you in just a few seconds. So that way, seeing that the white one doesn't go completely through the wire at the bottom because I made that loop. I'm going to twist off the top part of that so it's nice and tight. And then I'm just going to cut this. This is a piece of scrap ribbon that was a wired piece that had already been cut in half. So I'm trimming off the wired edge part so that I actually use both of these. I'm going to take that non-wired edge piece and thread that through that bottom loop that I left and tie that in a knot. Then I'm going to make a little bow out of the piece that still had the wire in it, and I'm going to attach that onto the bottom as well. So I'll have like the 4 little tails hanging down. I'm using hot glue to attach this. And so this will be like the little dangly part that hangs out of the bottom of the spool. So here's the little batch of beads that I have from Hobby Lobby, and I think these glitter pebbles came from there as well. I'm going to use these to decorate the tree. So I just add a little spot of hot glue, pick out one of the beads, and I try to put these in place so that you don't see the holes through, that the beads have. Just disguising that as much as possible. And I just randomly go around adding these as I see fit. To make the hanger, I took another piece of that wire and I'm wrapping that as tightly as I can around the very tip top of that tree. Enough for it to be secure, but not enough for it to show from underneath, because I'm going to thread down another little bead that's in a star shape on top of this. So I'm twisting that wire. I want to make sure I still leave a loop at the top so you can hang it. But I just want that to be on there securely as possible. And here's the little star bead. I'm going to feed that down over the wire. This wire is really thin. It's really easy to do this. And then I'm going to attach that with some hot glue. I'm adding more of that diamond dust over the entire tree. I'm just going to randomly brush. I did want a lot of coverage of the diamond dust on that star, so I added more Mod Podge there. And then I just dabbed this all over the tree, on the ornaments, as well as the little, tree branches. I have a little snowflake button I'm going to cover this with a coat of my gilded wax in the color Pearl. I have a strip of torn tea towel that I am going to glue on with Fabri-Tac glue. I'm going to cut that to size and then glue it down. I've got another length of that wire that I am going to wrap around a couple of times. I think I go 3 times around, trim that up, and then I'm going to twist that securely on there and then make little curlicues on each end just by wrapping the wire around a paintbrush handle. I cut another little small piece of that tea towel to glue over the center portion where I'm going to glue my little snowflake button so it has more to attach to since it's not an even surface. And here I'm using these little specially designed nippers for buttons where you can just trim the back right off. So now I need to attach that bottom piece that I made. I'm wrapping some jute twine around the twisted up wire just to thicken this up a little bit so it'll fit more snugly into the hole on the bottom of the wood spool. Once I put this up in there, I really couldn't get it back out. It was so snug, so I had to just kind of lift up the edge of that bead and get some hot glue in around that to make sure it was secure. Once I had this on there, I went ahead and trimmed up the ends of those little ribbons, and that completes this first wood spool Christmas tree. To finish up the 2 smaller ones, I'm using a different strip of that homespun fabric, wrapping that around the middle of each one. Then I'm going to attach some little wood buttons, and I'll also do some sort of little bead hanger on the bottom. These are the little wood buttons I'm going to use. I do 4 on each spool. I'm painting a couple of the smaller wood beads in that raw umber, only this time I forgot to wipe them back, so they ended up being a lot darker than I wanted them to be. I also have these 2 little tiny bells and 2 more of the little star beads. I'm going to give those several coats of this same brown paint. And when that is dry, I go over these with some antique gold rub and buff. I did have to use a little sponge applicator to get into those little tiny inside areas of those star shapes. I sanded back those beads a little bit and then I applied some of my antiquing wax. And now I'm going to apply the hanger the same way I did the larger one, only I'm using jute twine for this, folding it in half and putting it through the bottom of that star, and then adding some hot glue to the top of the tree, putting that twine down on there first, and then shoving the star shape down on as far as I can get it, and that holds it really secure. These are really lightweight, so it doesn't take a lot to hold these. Tied off a knot at the top, trimmed it, used the lighter to burn the fuzzies, and then I can add the bottom. I'm threading the little bell onto the jute twine and tying a knot, and then I will slide the bead down over the top of that. I'll tie a knot at the top of the bead so that it doesn't come out, and it gives something again to grip into the hole on the bottom of the spool. and then I just apply that up in there with some hot glue. There are so many different ways you can decorate these to fit your own style. I hope you'll give it a try. For this one, I'm using one of the wood planks from Dollar Tree and this Harlequin patterned scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to trace around that wood plank and then use my paper cutter to get nice straight cuts. I need two pieces that are the size of the wood plank so I can put this on front and back. I decided to try the iron-on method with this, with the scrapbook paper. I wasn't sure if it would work well because it's thicker than decoupage paper, but I wanted to give it a go. So I let that Mod Podge dry, and then I put my piece of scrapbook paper down and then a piece of parchment paper, and I'm using my craft iron to reactivate that glue and get that sealed on there. I sanded off the excess with my little finger sander, and then anywhere around the edges that I did have where it didn't adhere properly, it did not work as well as it would have if I had done it just the regular way. I went in with some more Mod Podge just to seal everything down. Then I did a scuff sanding to distress this pattern up just a little bit. Just some fine grit sandpaper. Then I went in and sealed that scrapbook paper with another coat of the Mod Podge. When that was dry, I'm taking my Dixie Belle Van Dyke Brown glaze and brushing this on all over and around the edges and then wiping it back with a cloth, and it comes off, pretty easily because it's already sealed. So as long as you get to it before it dries, it'll wipe right back and just leaves a little bit of age. I'm going to use a transfer from IOD's Candy Cane Cottage, this little Santa. So I'm going to lay him on there and then get him stuck down with my little transfer tool. I love the way this looked, except that some of that pattern did show through onto the lighter portions of Santa, and I wasn't real thrilled about that. Now I've got Redesign's trimmings mold, and I'm using Das air dry clay to make a little bead trim to go around the front of this board. After I get that casting out of the mold, I do like to take some water and with my finger just go around and smooth down all those edges. With that done, I just lay that on my board and mark where I need to cut it so that it will fit, and I continue that all the way around until I have 4 pieces. I want to use these decorative tacks in the corners, so I'm going to go ahead and trim off those ends. It won't fit on there, and I didn't want to, have to go through the board. So I'm just going to trim off that excess wire at the end. And then after I get these glued down, I'm using Type Bond Quick and Thick for this, by the way. I can take those tacks and set them into place where I want them so that the clay will dry with those indentations for the tacks. So I'm not going to be gluing them into place. I'm just figuring out where I want them, and I'm pressing that down into the clay. And then once that's dry, I can remove those, do the painting, and then reattach them with glue. I'm using burnt sienna as my base color, and I know this looks really funky, it looks really orange, but by the time I do all the other colors, it adds just the little bit of redness to this that I wanted it to. Next up is raw umber. I'm going to water this down a little bit and brush that on over that burnt sienna so I don't get total coverage, but it really tones that down a lot. And then we'll move on to the next color. I'm going to be doing, I think, 3 lighter colors. The first one is beige. And this is more of a dry brush that I'm doing with these lighter colors. Next up is linen. And then oyster beige. I'm going to give this a coat of my Duraclear Ultra Matte Sealer. When that's dry, I'm using the Van Dyke Brown Glaze over this trim, just like I did on the front and back of the board. When I wipe this back, it removes most of it from the tops, but it leaves it down in all those little crevices and gives it a nice vintagey look. Time to add those tacks back in, just using Fabri-Tac glue for this, putting them right back into place where they fit into the little grooves that I made by leaving them in there until the clay was almost completely dry. Now I'm using IOD's Apothecary Labels stamp, another coffee stained coffee filter, and my Stays on Ink in Timber Brown. I am going to spell out Jolly Old Elf, and I'm doing these one letter at a time so that I can get this closer together than if you had put all the letters onto a thin mount and stamped it that way. I'm cutting a little dovetail at the ends to make like a little banner. And then I'm going to distress this with the Vintage Photo Distress Oxide, using that little brush applicator to get that all over the little piece of coffee filter. And then I will trim out the edges of this with my brushed bronze metallic paint. And here I'm using that same paint to go over those tacks in the corner and a nice little light dry brushing across the tops of the beaded trim. When all that was dry, I attached my little banner piece with some Fabri-Tac glue. I'm going to glue it down at the end and then leave a space and then tack it down kind of in the middle, and then glue again at the other end so it has like a little wavy, raised appearance to it. For the hanger, I'm recycling this piece of ribbon that had this kind of weird white stitching going down the center. I folded it in half so that that stitching would be on the edge, and then I'm putting that gold rub and buff over that stitching. And I'm also going to use these little brads, much like I did the tacks on the front. I just need 2 of them for this because I'm going to put one on each end of the hanger. I'm snipping off the brads and then tucking what's left there onto the inside so that I can glue these on. Using my hot glue, I'm going to attach one end of that ribbon, and then I will add the brads on top of that. Before we take a final look, I want to say thank you so very much for joining me here today. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. I hope that you find my content useful, will give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.